Hi everyone, and welcome to the Millennial Revolt. Today we are going to be talking about how President Trump caved into the military-industrial complex. Today we are going to be talking about how the uniparty of the neocons and neoliberals are celebrating America's actions in Syria yesterday. Today we're also going to be talking about how the prostitutes in our legacy media are celebrating President Trump's unilateral actions. And we're also going to be talking about the fallout from the United States strikes on the military airbase. So there's so much I want to talk about. There's so much we have to get into, so let's just jump right into it. Whenever we have our politicians saying we need to go bomb someone, we need to go strike something, and they start showing pictures of dead children, we have our legacy media who heeds their call and begins ginning up fear and beating the drum beats of war. We have this on the left and the right. They both do it in unison together. This isn't a partisan thing. This has been happening for years. We've seen when this happened in the lead up to the Iraq War. We've seen when this happened in the lead up to the destruction of Libya and the bombing of that country and the ousting of Muammar Gaddafi. And we're seeing it now. I can remember what happened during Libya. I can see what is happening now. And if you look back at the footage, it is exactly the same thing. The actors may change, but the script stays the same. So there's so much to talk about. There's so much we have to get into. So let's just jump right into it. So the first thing we need to talk about is our legacy media, because they are the ultimate people who push the drumbeats of war every single time something like this happens. They are a propaganda machine. They are an extended arm of the government to keep this fear-mongering, this war beating going. Now, yesterday, I've seen clips from Shepard Smith saying that the U.S. is striking the brutal dictator Bashar al-Assad. It's language like that that instills images into people's minds. It's what they say, it's what they do. We've also seen video of Brian Williams waxing poetically about the U.S. ships launching their missiles from the night sky, and I'm going to show you guys that video right now.
Go into greater detail. We see these beautiful pictures at night from the decks of these two U.S. Navy vessels in the Eastern Mediterranean. I am tempted to quote the great Leonard Cohen, "I'm guided by the beauty of our weapons." And they are beautiful pictures of fearsome armaments making what is for them a brief flight over to this airfield. What did they hit? What are you convinced?
This is what you have in our legacy media. This is the kind of sickness that has infected these people. To think that you should start waxing poetically about airstrikes is just unbelievable. And if I never saw the clip myself, I would just thinking someone would be fucking with me, but it's true. Every time we see that there is bubblings of war, or there's rumblings of a possible war or a bombing campaign by the United States, we see that our legacy media instantly turns into state-run propaganda. Now, claims from the U.S. government and military are immediately vested with questioned truth and accuracy, while claims from foreign advisories such as Russia and Syria are reflexively scorned as lies and propaganda. We also saw last night Fareed Zakaria on CNN declare that President Trump has now been instantly transformed into the President of the United States in all of its loftiness and most regal sense of the term, because he decided to launch an illegal airstrike, continuing to violate international law based off of faulty information. This is the kind of precedence that has been set for years. I think U.S. war fever has been something that has been ingrained in the American psyche. And once the tidal wave of American war frenzy is unleashed, usually the questioning and investigative work usually falls to the wayside. Wanting conclusive evidence before bombing commences is usually vilified as sympathy for the foreign enemy, the same way asking for evidence or claims against Russia instantly converts one into a Kremlin agent or a stooge for Vladimir Putin. That the Syrian government deliberately used chemical weapons to bomb civilians before absolute truth and U.S. discourse within less than 24 hours, even though Justin Trudeau, the Canadian Prime Minister, urged an investigation. And even though Susan Rice just 2 months ago boasted to NPR, saying that we were able to get the Syrian government to voluntarily and verifiably give up its chemical weapons stockpile. John Kerry also jumped aboard that train, saying that we got the Syrian government to give up their chemical weapons. So this brings us to the most prevalent question that everyone seems to be asking. Why would Assad gas his civilians? It doesn't make any sense. This was coming at a time when the US was signaling a shift in its foreign policy as far as Syria is concerned, with the removal of Assad. They were saying that that wasn't on the agenda anymore. This was also coming at a time when the US and Russia was working together over the skies in Syria, coordinating attacks against Islamic State as well as Al-Qaeda. This was coming at a time when the SAA, the Syrian Arab Army, was delivering blow after blow against Al-Qaeda and ISIS in Syria, and the tides of war were turning in Assad's favor. So while all of this was going on, why would he suddenly gas his civilians, which in turn would urge a response from the US government as well as an international outcry? Doesn't make any sense. Whatever happened with these events in this short period of time, we know that there has been a lot of deaths in this war. We know that there has been so much misinformation that has come out during the Syrian civil war. Something we do know is that the CIA has spent more than $1 billion a year to arm anti-Assad rebels for years, and the US began bombing Syria in 2014. President Trump has already escalated that bombing campaign, culminating in a strike last month that Syrians say destroyed a mosque and killed dozens. For all of President Assad's faults, what he does do is protect a lot of the religious minorities in his country. And that's something that has to be taken in consideration given what has been happening to religious minorities in the Middle East for decades. What makes this latest attack new is rather than allegedly targeting terrorist sites of ISIS and Al-Qaeda, President Trump targeted the Syrian government, something that President Obama threatened to do in 2013, but he never did. Leading congressional Democrats included Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and House Minority Nancy Pelosi praised President Trump's bombing campaign. You see, this is something that I have been talking about a lot. The uniparty of the neocons and the neoliberals. They pretend that they want different things, but in the end they have the same goal. Hours before the bombing commenced, it was known Trump was planning it. Hillary Clinton, who had been critical of President Obama for years for not attacking Assad, appeared at an event and offered her categorical support for what President Trump was planning to do, rather than a new war to remove him. Once these aggressions are started and once it's unleashed, it's often difficult and impossible to contain. The Russian Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev said that the U.S. missile strike violated not only international law, but added that the attack was on the brink of military clashes with Russia. He said that instead of their much publicized thesis about a joint fight with a common enemy, Islamic State, IS, formerly known as ISIS, or ISIL, the Trump administration has proven that it will fiercely fight against the legal government of Syria. The Kremlin released a statement according to which President Putin views the U.S. strikes on Syria as an aggression against a sovereign state in violation of the norms of international law, and on a made-up pretext. This step by Washington will inflict major damage on U.S.-Russia ties. Moscow has suspended communications with U.S. forces designed to stop planes colliding over Syria. A Russian freight-carrying cruise missile sailed through the Phosphorus Strait into the Mediterranean Sea, although there was no indication it was directly in response to the U.S. action. According to the Syrian Arab news agency, 9 civilians, including 4 children, were killed in the U.S. missile attack on the military air base and the nearby villages in the southeastern countryside of Homs province. Civil sources said that 2 missiles used in the U.S. attack that hit the Al-Sharat air base in the central region killed 5 civilians, including 3 children, in addition to causing huge material damage to the houses. Another U.S. missile fell in Al-Harat village, killing 4 civilians, including a child. Moreover, 7 civilians were injured as a missile struck houses in the Al-Mazul village, 4 kilometers away from the Al-Sharat air base. Now, on another note, world leaders have praised the U.S. strikes and persisted that Russian President Vladimir Putin hold urgent talks with President Trump to prevent the Syrian crisis from escalating into a worldwide conflict. Now, it just astounds me how these people can be leaders of multiple nations and not think that instead of the U.S. taking unilateral action without the consensus of the rest of the global community, that talks should have been held first, that an investigation should have been done to actually make sure that it was the Syrian government who did this, who ordered this, when we have known that the rebels have been using chemical weapons before, that the OPCW reports have shown that the Syrian government has not used chemical weapons. Instead, we have the U.S. take unilateral action, start doing airstrikes, and then world leaders are falling in lockstep with the U.S. goose dance that they're doing. Same crap that they did with Libya, the same crap that they did with Iraq and Afghanistan, and then are suddenly urging the Russian president to hold emergency meetings because they fear that this could escalate into a world conflict. I just want to know where their minds are. Where's their head at? Because this doesn't seem as if this is rational decisions being taken by people who are supposed to be leaders of the free world. This doesn't seem as if people have the forethought of thinking of the consequences of their actions. They just want to go off guns blazing and then wait for the fallout to happen and then try to come up with an agreement later on. That's not how this works. That's not how any of this works. Discourse, conversation, dialogue is something that should always happen first, second, and last. You should never use your military for any of these situations because it never ends well. Regime change never ends well. Nation building has not worked ever since the U.S. has tried it. Syrian Foreign Minister Walid Maloum denied claims that the military used chemical weapons in the western city of Idlib. Speaking at a news conference, Maloum said an airstrike by the Syrian military had targeted an arms depot where chemical weapons stockpiles were stored by Islamic State and al-Nusra Front militants. He said it's impossible that the army, which has been making significant gains in almost all theaters of the Syrian war, would use banned chemical weapons against its own people, and even terrorists. While all of this has been going on, the UNSC, which is the United Nations Security Council, has been holding emergency meetings ever since the chemical gas attack happened and because of the U.S. taking unilateral action in Syria. Now, as you know, our ambassador is Nikki Haley, and at times she reminds me of Samantha Powers and Susan Rice, but she makes Samantha Powers' warmongering self look like a moderate. Nikki Haley is out of her mind. She is insane. Nikki Haley also made threats at the United Nations Security Council threatening additional military action against the Syrian government of President Bashar al-Assad. She said that the United States took quote-unquote measured steps in their attack against a Syrian military base. She said that we are prepared to do more, but we hope that will not be necessary. But with all of these situations, usually once you start these things, it usually spirals out of control. She said it is time for all civilized nations to stop the horror that is taking place in Syria and demand a political solution. Now, what is so crazy to me is the United States, their selective phony outrage about atrocities that are happening all over the world. Why do they not talk about anything that's happening to people in Iran or things that are happening to people in the United Arab Emirates or in Saudi Arabia, or is what's happening to girls in Africa with Boko Haram who are kidnapping people, or what's happening to the white people down in South Africa. You have the president threatening to kill all these people, and nobody seems to want to talk about it or seems to want to come to a global solution where the United States can use our influence to get a diplomatic solution done. But yet we want to engage in regime change in Syria because it is of a vital importance to the United States. Or better yet, what's happening in our own country with the DC girls who are missing, with the children who are missing all over the country, with our homeless, with our veterans not being taken care of, with our roads falling apart. These are the things that Trump supporters voted him in office to accomplish. If you're going to say you're going to put America first, and if that is the hashtag MAGA that you're going to go with, then follow through with it. Nobody wants another war. Nobody wants these stupid regime changes that just end up costing us in the back end. While Americans get injured, maimed, killed, hurt, our country gets poorer, we get poorer, we become more hated while they continue to curse our name and burn our flag all around the world, and anti-American sentiments rise. Our politicians get rich off the back of our misery. This does not help anyone. This doesn't make us stronger as a nation. This doesn't bring us together. It brings the political class together because they're all cheering. They're all in lockstep together. The Uniparty has what they've always wanted: a bombing campaign in Syria and more troops on the ground that I hope to God aren't coming. But this is the reality of what's happening now. And for all people who think that this is going to just be a one-off thing, you really need to look at how this has played out before. I hope our country doesn't fall for the false siren song of war. I hope that our political class, our politicians, heed the lessons of history and keep the American people in mind before they make any decisions that will affect us. I hope that people understand the very complicated situation that is going on in Syria. And Syria is not Iraq. It is not Afghanistan. It is not Libya. It is not even Yemen. It has very powerful allies who are aligned with it. And we could slide into a global conflict very quickly if we are not careful. So I'm going to leave you guys with two quotes that I think is very relevant to this situation. And the first one is, "Every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired, signifies, in the final sense, a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and are not clothed. This world in arms is not spending money alone. It is spending the sweat of its laborers, the genius of its scientists, the hopes of its children." And the final quote is, "Here in America, we are descended in blood and in spirit from revolutionists and rebels, men and women who dare to dissent from accepted doctrine. As their heirs, may we never confuse honest dissent with disloyal subversion." And both quotes were from former President Dwight D. Eisenhower. I'm the Millennial Revolt. Thank you guys so much for watching, and you have a wonderful day. Bye.